The Golden Lion and the Sword Saint, Riot in Flanders, sequel, edited machine translation, 1, and that concludes the earliest recorded account of how the Kingdom of Lugunica changed its name from the Lion Kingdom and went on to weave its history as the Dragon Kingdom. With that, he closed the book of historical records with a snap. He glanced over at the girl he had been reading to and noticed she had narrowed her red eyes, her arms crossed, wearing a serious expression on her face. Her reaction seemed unusual. Had there been something lacking in his explanation? However, before he could ask, what did you just say? Felt actually sat through an entire lesson. Lord Rome's surprise is entirely justified. Tomorrow there will be a blizzard. The ones who spoke in astonishment were Rome, the elderly giant, and the twin maids of the mansion, Flam and Grassus. Seeing their astonished eyes, the girl who had been wearing a serious expression curled her lips and said, "What? You guys are overreacting way too much. Even I can sit through a lesson if the story's interesting enough, you know." Lady felt, that is not exactly something to be proud of. I'm just telling the truth. In other words, your talk was boring. You should learn from sensei a little, got it? I understand. I'll try to be as diligent as possible. Sticking out her tongue with a mischievous grin, Felt muttered such rude remarks that made the young man with flaming red hair drop his shoulders. However, there was no real need for him to feel disheartened or reflect on anything too deeply. After all, imparting knowledge was not the primary duty of the Sword Saint, Reinhard van Istria. That's quite outside your area of expertise. Your role is to serve as Lady Felt's knight. Sir Ezzo, you don't have to take on everything yourself. There's no need to worry. Going forward, Lady Felt's education should be entrusted to a proper educator like myself. Although I'm not actually an educator. Whoa, that was a surprise. While trying to reason with Reinhard, he suddenly realized that he had gone off course. Raising his voice in frustration, he caused Felt's slightly sharp eyes to widen in surprise. And right in front of her, the so-called sensei, Ezzo Cadner, clutched his head. Then he shouted, "I was recruited as an assistant for government affairs, not as a teacher." Ezzo Cadner, known as the Grey Magician, was recently recruited into the Felt camp. This connection began when he helped resolve a disturbance centered around the black market in the city of Earth Dragons, Flanders. Ez himself considered his decision to enter Felt's service a wise one. From the beginning, Ezzo had a goal he needed to achieve, one that required overcoming several obstacles along the way. Working under Felt was a significant step forward in accomplishing what he had set out to do. Beyond that, the opportunity to work with someone he could trust and respect was a rare stroke of good fortune. If that person also recognized and valued his abilities and character, there was nothing more he could ask for. After learning more about the inner workings of the faction, he was shocked that it had managed to maintain even a superficial sense of organization up until now. And he saw it as an opportunity for him to show his worth. Now that he was no longer just a guest but an official member, he welcomed having a role to play. Before he arrived, Old Man Rome had somehow managed to hold the faction together. He now cooperated with Ez to figure out which of the factions many windows needed to be shut and which should remain open. At that moment, Ezzo let out his frustration. His work had been completely disrupted by Felt and Reinhard's noisy game of chase. I understand Sir Reinhard's point, but if studying becomes nothing more than a tedious task of memorization, it's no surprise that Lady Felt would want to run away from it. Right. You get it, don't you? Please say more, Sensei. However, Lady Felt, you do realize that you lack the knowledge and refinement expected of your position, don't you? Sir Reinhard has a responsibility to uphold for recommending you. His strictness comes from his concern for you. You shouldn't speak ill of him. Yes, that's correct. Of course, I can't deny my incompetence and my inability to fully express myself, but there are some things I'd like Lady Felt to understand. With Felt on his right and Reinhard on his left, Ezzo listened to both of their arguments, nodding at the validity of each point as he struggled to mediate their dispute. It seemed that the daily study sessions, focused on acquiring the knowledge and etiquette necessary for the royal selection, frequently caused cracks in the master-servant relationship between Felt and Reinhardt. This chase was apparently a routine occurrence, and simply brushing it off as another playful moment would be irresponsible. At first glance, it may seem like Felt is just being selfish, but that was not the essence of the matter. Dragging her back and forcing her to sit at a desk wasn't the answer. What was important was, everyone feels discomfort when told to learn or memorize things they have no interest in. However, the joy of overcoming what once seemed impossible, and the satisfaction of resolving a puzzling question, is universal. It affects everyone. What's needed is a way to spark the desire to learn. With that in mind, Ezo had flipped through a history book of the kingdom of Lugunica, the very one Felt had been using in her studies, and put his theory into practice. The result was the scene that had unfolded earlier. Both Felt, who had been resting her chin on her hand with a dissatisfied expression at first, and even Reinhard, who had been keeping watch to make sure she didn't run away, leaned in with full attention as Ez explained historical figures and events. He touched on turning points in history that could be called twists of fate, engaging them in his discourse as he spoke. Even Old Man Rome and the twins, at some point, came in for a break and watched the whole thing without interrupting. Ezo himself didn't mind having an attentive audience. In fact, getting carried away in the moment, he spoke with such enthusiasm that he ended up lecturing Reinhard on principles and reason. And for that, he deeply regretted it. Damn it, I've made the same mistake again. Mistake? What are you talking about? You didn't mess up at all. Honestly, I'm kinda impressed. Never thought I'd find studying fun. Guess there's a reason you get called sensei. Lady Felt's words are right. I'm impressed. You're not just a noisy little guy after all. I take issue with how you phrased that, Miss Glassies, but please stop. I am not a teacher. At least not in this faction. Back in the flower district of Flanders, where he had once taught prostitutes how to read, write, and do arithmetic, it was only natural to be called sensei. But here, Ezo was determined to be something else. Even if he firmly told himself that this was not what he should do, it was difficult to ignore. No, I will never do it again. It was a mistake of my own stupidity. It seems like you've got a lot on your mind, but I must admit, I was somewhat impressed by your teaching style. Don't overthink it so much. No, Sir Rome. I appreciate your feelings, but I am an adult. I know my own shortcomings. I can fix them. Is it because I'm not a good adult? I don't quite get what you mean by your reflection. Old Man Rome scratched his cheek with a thick finger, tilting his head at Ezo's self-reproach. The older man's gaze, as if he were looking at something immature, made Ezo feel quite uncomfortable. However, it also prompted him to reflect deeply on his bad habit of constantly wanting to teach and intervene. That very trait had complicated many of his past relationships. Of course, there were times when speaking up was the right course of action. But Ezo was still a newcomer in this faction, and he had no right to barge in and undermine its existing leadership. In any case, my personal opinion is that the key to studying is cultivating interest and motivation. If we create the right environment, Lady Felt's ability to learn will naturally flourish. No need to add personal opinion to that. It actually sounds useful, so you might as well just say it straight. What's up with you? No, it's nothing important. Ezo began to wrap up while Felt gave a wry smile. She then called out to Reinhard, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. He simply shook his head slowly. Still, when someone said it's nothing, it was rarely ever truly nothing. Well, if you say so, guess it really isn't a big deal. And with that, Felt cut the conversation off, and the opportunity to pursue the matter was missed. 3, and so, the concept of zero in numbers ended up greatly transforming arithmetic. Previously, people believed that something non-existent couldn't be accounted for in equations, but that perception changed. I see. Now that you mention it, it makes sense. Nobody would think of something that doesn't exist as actually being there. Exactly. Even in a brothel, there's a huge difference between receiving a tip and not getting one. I'd say that's a bit of a different topic, but the way of thinking isn't entirely wrong. By considering things we usually don't even think about and seeing what's normally unseen, our perception changes. In a way, that's kind of like magic. Exactly. With a loud bang, Ez slammed his hand on the desk, startling the 3 listeners. Gaston, Camberley, and Ratchins shuddered and exclaimed, "Whoa!" However, Ezo paid no mind to their reaction. He leaned forward and continued. To think of something that doesn't exist, and to prove that something unreachable can be reached, that, too, is just another way of perceiving and understanding the world. Magic is merely one aspect of such differences in perception. The ability to think flexibly about such things is truly remarkable. You three are excellent students, or rather, not students at all. Don't correct yourself like that. Still, I learned a lot from this, you know. Holding his green-haired head in his hands, Ezo agonized once again over how he had let himself get carried away with teaching. He hadn't intended to give a lecture at first. It had started when the three came to collect their wages at the mansion, which turned out to be uneven. The discussion began with an explanation of why their wages differed. Camberley's lower pay was due to an incident in Flanders and his debts, whereas Gaston and Camberley had both received rewards related to the same incident. From there, the conversation naturally drifted into the intricacies of arithmetic. I really need to stop this bad habit of mine. But isn't it just that? A habit. I heard you were even explaining to those twins why flowers and vegetables grow with just soil and water. I was just passing by and overheard a cute, curiosity-filled conversation, so I couldn't help myself. Ratchins had pointed out how Ezo had ended up in a similar situation while chatting with Flam and Grassus as they peeled vegetables in the kitchen. What started as a simple explanation spiraled into a full-blown lecture, once again. Next time, I won't let this happen. I don't get it, but hey, don't stress over it too much, Sensei. Yeah, if you're ever too tired from all that thinking, why not come to the red light district with us for fun instead of just teaching? Going out to party with the people you usually lecture. That's a terrible idea. As they left, noisily chatting about something questionable, Ezo watched them with a mix of amusement and exasperation. He appreciated their concern, even if the way they showed it was unique. But that, too, was something you could only understand with time and familiarity. Still, rushing relationships never works out. My mistakes always come from acting too fast. That's probably why I got along so well with the women in the red light district. They're experts at reading social cues and adjusting their approach accordingly. As he recalled his students from the district, Ezo reflected on how, despite being older and more knowledgeable, he fell far behind them in terms of social skills and emotional intelligence. He didn't want to make mistakes here. After all, for the first time, he truly believed he had found where he belonged. Sir Ezo, may I have a moment? Ahem, Sir Reinhard. After the lively trio had bustled out, Ezo welcomed Reinhard into the office space he had been generously provided. The red-haired sword saint gestured toward the hallway with a gentle expression. Those three just left, didn't they? They seemed to be having a great time. What were you talking about? It started as a discussion about wages, but then it turned into a breakdown of arithmetic. They're quite curious, and before I knew it, I was deep into explaining things. I see. That explains why they looked so entertained. After hearing the explanation, Reinhard glanced down the hallway once more, with a subtle furrow of his brow. His reaction gave Ezo a familiar sense of unease. It was a feeling he had experienced before. I'm not sure if I should ask this, but can I? Battling his own reluctance to pry, Ez ultimately gave in to his nature. At Ezo's words, Reinhard nodded. Then, after closing the door behind him with one hand, he stepped further into the room. I actually have something I'd like to discuss with you, Sir Ezo. With me, is it about the management of the territory, or perhaps an update regarding the royal selection? You've been helping with both, but I'd say it's more related to the latter. Having settled on the topic of the royal selection, Reinhard hesitated for a moment. Though their acquaintance was brief, his demeanor was uncharacteristic of the Sword Saint, making Ezo take notice. Then Reinhard finally spoke. I would like your assistance with Lady Felt's education. Lady Felt's? Wait, but I understand. You've been deliberately avoiding interfering in that area. But this was the first time Lady Felt sat through an entire discussion without getting up or looking bored. Reinhard recalled the recent instance where Ez had read a history to her. It had a greater impact on her than expected, and Ezo himself didn't mind teaching. However, he still felt some resistance to the idea. I just joined the camp, so I think it's a bit excessive for me to be Lady Felt's tutor, And even if it's a sign of trust, you're being far too careless. I understand. Although I fear it may be a burden for you, please allow me to be present as well. Sir Reinhard, you as well. You're worried about political manipulation or hidden agendas, aren't you? My presence should ease those concerns. And I, too, was deeply impressed by your teaching style. I want to learn from you, Sir Ez. I don't want Lady Felt to see me as a boring knight. That last part seemed like his true motivation, and Ezo was momentarily taken aback. But Reinhard, despite his embarrassment, was completely sincere. This was the great sword saint revealing his weakness. For Ezo, that undeniable display of vulnerability was a sign of deep trust. Sir Ezo, you believe trust should be built over time, don't you? But the royal selection has a deadline, and neither Lady Felt nor I can afford to hesitate. Besides, I do trust you. I'm certain of it. How can you say that with such confidence? Because the divine protection of doubt lets me detect when someone harbors ulterior motives. Ez widened his eyes at Reinhard's matter-of-fact statement, and in response, the knight playfully winked. Whether it was a serious statement or a joke, Ezo couldn't be sure. However, not only Lady Felt, you are quite the fascinating person yourself, Sir Reinhard. If that's the case, then Lady Felt's influence must be strong. Was that humility? Or simply a knight who took great pride in his master? Either way, Ezo felt his previous doubts fade. Perhaps, in this place, he could afford to keep being his talkative, over-explaining self. Because these people wouldn't silently distance themselves from him, they'd yell at him to shut up first. And that kind of trust was a rare and precious thing. And